Good morning and welcome to the Daniel Wortman Show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dreamaginate Sports Studios. It is Monday, July the 1st. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. West Coast wake-up call and all time zones in between and around the world. Coming up in just a few minutes, we will be joined by Tom Byer. Really excited to have a chat with him. But first, a couple things. The U.S. women's national team played on Friday, and as we predicted, if the U.S. women's national team were able to get an early goal, we felt like that would spell trouble for France, and it did. Just looking at the way that the match played out, France had much of the possession. That they were just very sloppy in the final third. It very much looked like what we talked about, which is the early goal. I felt would unsettle France if they were able to get through the first 10 to 15 minutes unscathed. I felt like France would likely end up winning that match. If the U.S. were able to get a goal, then I felt like the U.S. are really good at front running. And I felt like they would be able to keep the pressure on, be able to sit back and not be forced to try to come at France, which would then open them up to even more attacks. And that early goal, to me, gave the U.S. The U.S. did not play well on Friday, but they did what they needed to do in the moments that they needed to do them, and that was convert their chances. They didn't get a lot of chances, but the chances they got, they converted. The early win with Megan Rapinoe, who didn't, despite the two goals, actually didn't have a great game. A lot of people, talking about how great she's playing. She's actually been struggling on the wing. She's not got the legs to get beyond people. And struggling defensively in her duties. I mean, she's not had great games, but she's had great moments. And when you're in a tournament like a World Cup, you need great moments from your top players. You may struggle in other aspects. You may not be able to do what you want to do in terms of competing for your team and working for your team. And it's not to say she didn't put in the effort. That's not at all what I'm saying. But she just didn't have a great game, but she had some great moments. And she converts that early free kick chance, and I don't think France mentally ever recovered from that. And the problem with that chance wasn't that she had an incredible strike of the ball. The problem with that whole setup was actually France. They tactically handled it all wrong. It was a kick on the, if you're looking at the goal, on the left side of the 18-yard box, and they only put two players in the wall. And the way those two players were positioned didn't cover enough of the near post in the angle. And so you had those two players, and then the head scratcher for me was not just that aspect, but it was also the fact that the French players were not in front of the U.S. women's national team players in the wall, right in front of the goal, right around the 6-yard box, in the line. They were all marking behind the U.S. player, not a person in front. So basically, just to give you this picture, if you didn't see the play, you had Megan Rapinoe taking the free kick, only two French players in the wall. They needed a third to create basically to force Megan at that point to pretty much only have one option, and that was to try to go high. And at high, it was going to be difficult for her to get from that angle up and over near post, top corner, which would have been a wonder strike. And I don't know that she could have beaten the keeper from that angle anyway. And The other would have been to try to go into the wall and high, and that would have been into a mix. It's not to say it couldn't have worked out, but by keeping only 2 in the wall, it gave the U.S. the opportunity to try to play a ball low, hard, near post, because they didn't really positionally cover that. And then by not having a person on the front side of the row of players, both the French and U.S. players that were right at the top of that 6-yard box area, by not having a French player closest to the ball to start off that succession of players, it gave the U.S. a window, and the French goalkeeper never had a chance. She never saw the ball. And, it found a little lane and worked its way through and into the back of the net before the French keeper saw what happened. So I think the French tactically got that moment wrong, had plenty of game time and plenty of possession and plenty of opportunities to not only equalize and win. The French team, played pretty well outside of executing in and around the final third. You could tell they were pressing on some shots and really wanting to get that goal back, and were able to get one back after falling 2-0 later on with Megan Rapinoe's second goal, which was great work by Alex Morgan and Tobin Heath. That goal should really kind of partially go to those two. They had really good moment there on the counterattack against the run of play. And Megan Rapinoe was wide open in the back to one touch tap into the goal for her second of the match. And again, like I said, you need your best players to have great moments, and she had great moments, and so that was really, really a good result, obviously, for the U.S. Women's National Team. They move on. They play England on Tuesday, July 2nd, in the semifinals. And we'll see how that one shapes up. On the other side of the women's bracket, the surprise upset, Sweden had not beaten Germany in a tournament like this since 1991, and they were able to get a 2-1 result after falling early to Germany. They came back and equalized, and then in the second half got the second and won 2-1 and had multiple chances. They could have even stretched the score a little bit, but they looked very, very good, much better than they did when they played the U.S. Women's National Team in that final group stage game, which, maybe that was just a kind of partial rest day. Maybe we don't want to show our cards too early because we may face them again. I'm not sure, but they definitely looked really good. Against Germany. Germany just seemed to be out of sorts. Germany actually really looked like they did in the very beginning of the tournament, where they were getting results in their group stage, but they weren't convincing in the way that they were playing. It looked like Sweden had figured something out against Germany, and Germany just had no answers. The other quarterfinal, Netherlands looking good again, and so Netherlands facing off against Sweden, and then we will see the U.S. and England, and then out of that we'll have our final. So we'll see how it plays out. On the men's national team side of the ledger, they are playing in the Gold Cup, which is a second-rate continental tournament. It is nowhere near Copa America out of CONMEBOL, South American Federation. Nowhere near the Euros, which is probably the number one continental competition in the world. It's a second-rate tournament for a variety of reasons. And even still, the U.S. Last night faced off against Curacao in a knockout match. And Curacao had more shots, more possession, looked like the more composed team, looked like the better team. They looked like what the U.S. should have looked like against Curacao. The U.S. were fortunate to get one goal and win 1-0, but looked terrible. I mentioned last night on Twitter that after the match that the U.S. men's national team performance was pathetic, pitiful, and embarrassing. It was pathetic because we should be aspiring to become the greatest soccer country on earth, and our men's national team is awful. This is nothing personal against the players in the program. This is nothing personal against them as people or the coaching staff or anyone within the federation. This is just an assessment on performance, and the performance was pathetic. It was not good tactically. It was awful. There was just poor execution all over the field, and it didn't look like this team even had a plan, like an understanding of how to play. It was just really bad and disjointed, disconnected. Pressing without the ball wasn't good. They couldn't get the ball. They couldn't keep the ball. I mean, it just was a terrible performance. It was a pathetic performance. It was pitiful from the standpoint of you're going against Curacao and even the players that they have access to from the Netherlands, due to that being part of the Netherlands islands and all of that. These players are not playing. We're not going to be playing for the Dutch national team. We're talking about players that had no hope of that. Not to say that they were bad players. They clearly were better than our American players, which is my point. That's pitiful. And the last point is it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that we are looking at a team that is supposedly, learning a new way and learning this and supposed to be employing, a possession-based style. And I don't see it. Like it's all out of whack. The quality of players are not good enough. Whatever's being taught isn't working. It's a mess. And that's embarrassing because our U.S. men's national team should be aspiring for greatness. And, Curacao, in the grand scheme of things, if the U.S. men's national team was a quality team, Curacao should be dispatched with, 5-6-7-0. And the U.S. holding, 70% of possession. That's what the U.S. men's national team in a quality performance should look like. When we're winning 1-0 and the other team has most of the possession, having more shots, could have easily tied or won that match if they executed on some of those shots. That's not good. And that means we're way far off of being a quality team. And we should not settle. We should expect more. And I'm tired of the federation getting defensive over criticism and a performance or lack thereof. Your job is to build quality and excellence, and it's not getting done. And until it does, everyone should be looking at it with a healthy dose of skepticism. We want our national team. The criticism comes because we want our national team to be great. We want both of our teams to be great, the U.S. men's and women's national teams to be great. And there are things that the U.S. women's national team have got to get better on going forward. We can't just rely on having the best players. Our coaching has got to improve on the women's side because if it does, coupled with having the best players in the world, top to bottom, we can stay on top for a while on the women's side. On the men's side, we are nowhere near challenging for excellence, and we should not settle for that. So, speaking of not settling, Duck brand is a brand that you should not settle on. It's a brand you should seek out. They make quality products that if you are a soccer coach, a player, a goalkeeper, a parent, whatever, and you're looking for some resources that can help you with the game, whether that is learning how to watch a game and take notes, whether that is charting out plays for your team, whatever the case may be, check out Dutkick Brand at DUTKIG brand.com. There you will find a plethora is the word for the day, plethora of really cool products. And when you go there and place your order, use promo code DW Show and get 10% off your order. Again, that is DW Show, and you will get 10% off your order at dutkickbrand.com. We'll be right back after this with Tom Byer. Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Monday morning, July the 1st. And we are really excited to have joining us today Tom Byer. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, Daniel. I'm glad to be on the show. I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you. I'm a big fan, and I am constantly talking to people about your work, and your book has been a godsend, quite honestly, because it has helped me explain to parents what they can do, especially being from an area of the U.S. where it's more known for American football and baseball than soccer. To have the ability to say, hey, here's some things you can do. Who you may not know anything about the game, but here's some things you can do to create a soccer culture in your house and help your kids learn the game. And here's why it's important. And have been able to put the book in their hands and send them to Amazon repeatedly to order or get it on their Kindle. So, I just want to first off say thank you for writing the book, because it's been amazing resource, and I hope more and more people are able to read it and apply it to their own houses. So, first, before we get into the book and your work that you presently do, how did you end up in Japan and being an American? Growing up in the U.S. and deciding that Asia was where you were going to camp out for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, thanks first for the plug for the book. That's much appreciated, and we can circle back about that. But yeah, I got involved in Japanese football. Back in the mid 1980s. It's amazing how I got involved with the game here. It was through my community college coach in upstate New York, George Visvari, a Hungarian, who immigrated to the U.S. and he had a very successful career coaching in upstate New York. The winningest coach in the history of the NJCAA, two-time national champions, Ulster County Community College. A little plug for my school there, and he was friends with some coaches that were coaching over here, including the head coach of the Japan national team, Hans Alft, who was a Dutchman, who was appointed as the first ever foreign non-Japanese national team coach. And again, not getting into the long version, but I got introduced to Hitachi FC, which now is a J League member. They play under the name of Kashiwa Reysol. Um, and I got introduced there, and I went in and had a short stint. I was there, I played there, but I fell in love with Japan as well. So after my playing days, which were much more successful, my post playing days are much more successful than my playing days were. Um, I wound up staying in Japan, and then it's basically kind of a timeline from around 1989 until today. I mean, I've been here a long time. I came, the pre-J League boom, so to speak, before even the World Cup was thought about coming here in 2002. But that's really kind of how I got my start here. And then just kind of the rest is history. And there's lots of different timelines along the way of my journey. But yeah, it was from my college coach of how I got involved in football here. So it just goes to show, that international connection. Anywhere you go, you can sometimes be able to get some introductions, and it worked out well. And I've been here ever since.
Yeah, I know full well about those introductions and networking, and have met people all over the world that have opened doors to other people all over the world. It's an incredible thing to make a connection and then see what happens with that connection that keeps yielding more and more connections. So, looking back after you quit playing, you wanted to stay involved in the game and obviously stay in Japan. What was your initial thought process in terms of getting into coaching itself? Was it player development from an individual standpoint? Was it player development in terms of an age specific idea, or were you thinking, hey, I want to be a coach and whatever that means, whether it's a first team coach or
Yeah,
a youth coach or whatever.
yeah, it's interesting. I was very much influenced, as we all are when we're growing up, with people, good role models, right? And I had a really good role model, a guy by the name of Tommy Mulroy. Tommy's pretty well known around the United States, and he went to Ulster County Community College as well, but he was several years older than me. Um, and Tommy wound up, probably, maybe you haven't heard of him, you might be a little bit too young, but he's probably one of the foremost soccer clinicians in the United States. And he traveled all over the country. I mean, most of the older kind of school kind of coaches, everybody knows Tommy. And so I was greatly influenced by him. Tommy was more of a kind of a community promoter of the game. He once held the world record for juggling on top of the observatory room of the Empire State Building as a promotion for the New York Eagles professional team that he played for. So I was really fascinated with doing these events and doing camps and things. So that kind of got me started. So again, there's a bit of a timeline, a chronological timeline to what happened with me. And in 1988, before I quit playing, or right when I finished playing, I pitched the idea of doing these style type of football or soccer clinics around Japan. And I pitched the idea to the Nestle Corporation here, which makes drinks, right? There's a drink called Milo, Milo. We don't have it in the States, but it's like kind of like a Nesquik. And again, long story short, I pitched the idea of doing it to them, doing it with them as a sponsor, and they bought off on it. And I walked out of a meeting having committed to doing, to planning to do 50 events starting in 1989. Now, those events were basically just going around Japan, just doing clinics, as we call clinics, events, two, three, four, 500 kids, as many that would come. And then we had a routine, right? It went usually for about 2 hours. It wasn't just me, but I was one of the main guys. And then what I did was I couldn't really speak Japanese at the time. So I found guys that could do things that could complement what I couldn't do. So I found a guy who was bilingual, could speak English and Japanese. I had a friend of mine who was a former national team player. So he provided the network and the name to be able to go into the community. And that's how that's how it started off. Now, little did I know that clinic program would run for 10 years. And then that 10-year timeline, I was the constant. And then I had different guys coming around always assisting me. But that really got my start. That got me out there. That got me into the communities. There's 47 states in Japan. So I would travel around to all these different states doing these events. And I didn't really have a philosophy or any kind of, methodology at the time. This was my pre-Curver days as well, because I was greatly influenced along the way there. In the early 1990s, I was influenced with the Dutchman Will Curver by my good friend Paul Mariner, former striker of England, who you might see on ESPN, and he does the New England Revolution color commentating at the analysis. And he was a massive influence on me, and he got me interested in the work of Will Curver. And then we spent about 10 years doing these technical clinics and camps and things around Japan. I found an investor, invested heavily into commercial schools. So there's a timeline, but that's how I first started out, and I got interested in it. It was really just to survive and keep me in Japan at first. But then, along the way, I basically started gaining more knowledge. I started, learning more. I started taking my coaching licenses and getting experience. And then, also a little bit of luck involved, but you always kind of create your own luck. But I was in the right place at the right time, too, where, Japan throws its hat in the ring to become the, 2002 World Cup hosts. And, the same year in 1993, the J League is born. So it was just like a crazy time to be in Japan because football or soccer had become so popular.
So I want to take a little detour before we get back to the next kind of evolution of your clinics and philosophy, and take a quick detour to where you just left off, which is the J League. What was the talk of the day about the J League in terms of a vision and a plan? And how have you seen that grow since its implementation to where they are now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the J League was born in 1993. We started hearing plans about it a few years before that. I think it also probably fell in line with the idea that Japan wanted to host the 2002 World Cup. Now, you got to remember, the J League is much different than the MLS, in that the J League basically is the if I can get my English correct here, the professionalizing of the industrial league. So almost all of the and right now we've got three tiers: promotion, relegation, J1, 2, 3. We've got, I think, 54 or 55 teams in total. And so a majority of those teams, I'd say 90% of them, are basically still owned by major conglomerates or major groups like Nissan, Toyota, Mitsubishi, and then just the Mazda, the car companies, the electric, Panasonic, Hitachi, my old club. So most of them are owned by that. So there was a structure there. There was a structure there. There was organizations there, teams, people, resources, stadiums, but it was really the marketing side, and it was really more of the professionalism of making it professional, to make sure that these teams focused more on basically the local community. In the beginning, they forbade the companies from using their own company names, like Hitachi against the chest or Nissan. They tried to spur more kind of communityism of not associating with a company. So that's really a major difference between MLS, where MLS was just from zero, or most of the clubs, right? But no, I mean, you got to, if you know anything about Japan, Japan is a very organized, very disciplined culture and society. This is a league that was almost like a designer league, right? I mean, like when Japanese basically decide to do something, there's a word even in Japanese, komakai, which is like a really fine detail. So the league from the beginning has been very well organized, very well funded. So it had a very good start because of that financial backing. Here in Japan, not just in Japan, but in Asia in general, very rarely does a professional club own a stadium. They're all owned by either companies or governments, basically cities. There's no real private ownership of anything here. It's the same thing in China, same thing in Korea. Um, and there's no real foreign ownership as well. Almost every team is owned, with a couple of exceptions, and that's only started recently, But it's a really much different model than if we're trying to compare what's happening in the U.S.
So in that birth, um, there's been discussion about recently with Japan and their 100-year plan and kind of looking at
Yep.
building. Obviously, that comes from a culture that you're talking about order and getting organized, etc. How have you seen that from a cultural standpoint have an effect on the growth of the J League and its ability to now be able to, start even getting some international exposure? You've seen, names like Iniesta that have come to play in kind of more the twilight of their careers, but in years past, you wouldn't have heard a lot of that taking place. How have you seen that kind of evolution of the J League continue to grow since its birth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, again, you've got first of all, the JFA and the J League are very close to each other. They're in the same building, okay, which is very rare because most federations and most professionals are very much divided. But they're in the same building, okay? And the JFA came out and the J League with this like 100-year plan, which is quite interesting because Japan is the kind of country where you leave your ego at the door and you try to do what's best for the game, right? So they came up with this plan, and I mean, a lot of other countries, especially I work a lot of countries around the world, nobody has, or very few countries have a very long-term vision. At the most, maybe it's going to be 10 years. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I tend to think that maybe that's because, the people that are making the plan want to make sure that they're around to get the credit for if it happens, right? But the Japanese are much different than that. I put something out on Twitter recently, and I hadn't really thought about it, but if you look at, and these are countries I work in, both the United States, you look at Australia, and you look at Japan. Japan has a budget of over 200 million US dollars per year. It dwarfs the United States and Australia. In fact, it's probably bigger than both of them combined. But yet, their chairman and their board members and their president or the CEO are probably on less than $200,000 a year. Now, if you look at that, compared to what's happening in Australia, where the CEO could be on anywhere between $1 to $2 million, or even in the United States, the CEO or the general secretary could be on over, $1 million a year for, for 15 years, right? I mean, and the reason I'm pointing this out, and I'm not saying that, paying that kind of money is good or bad, but what I'm saying is if you compare them, you can get a glimpse into the Japanese culture, because everything in Japan is where we put the team first. The group, the organization comes first, and the people come second. And if you look at the other Western countries, you can see obviously what they value, right? I mean, we've got problems all over the world, and a lot of federations, and most of them, claim to not have enough money, but yet they pay quite extreme high salaries to their executives, right? So that's a big difference between what's happening here in Japan. And $200 million, that's a massive amount of money if you think about it. But the reason that they're able to create such a large budget is because of the organizational structure. The technical department, the competition department, the marketing department, and the sales department, they're all very close-knit organization where they all talk to each other. So what does that mean? What that means is that when the advertising part of the JFA is going to go to Dentsu, which is the advertising agent that basically finds the sponsors, they go to them and they can sell them a package that is very well organized, very well thought out, years in advance, at every single level of the game, whether it's beach soccer, whether it's futsal, whether it's whatever it is, both men's, both women's, and they're so organized. So then they can go to the technical department and figure out, well, can you prepare teams? And then the competition department is sitting there, and it's all figured out. And I got to be honest with you, because I work around the world with many federations. There's no federations that's disorganized. So when you're able to do that, you're able to go to the sponsors who are putting the big money up and basically sell them a very well organized, well thought out, visionarily planned strategy that works, that very few federations are able to do because they're disorganized. So that's just a little bit of a glimpse into what's happening in Japan, and to show you how that organization, it's like a really well-oiled machine, the way that it works, and in tandem with the J League back and forth and the JFA.
And just to pick up on where you're talking about the organization and the planning and putting the team above the individual in that kind of cultural context, I think I saw you tweet this out the other day about the Japanese women's national team in the World Cup, as well as the men's national team that were participating in Copa America this year. That both teams were sent with an eye on next summer's Olympics rather than this year's tournaments, that they were trying to get them prepared for next summer's Olympics, which, that takes a massive amount of discipline from the federation to do that. You don't see that very often. I remember when I saw your comment about that, I was thinking back to the 2018 U.S. soccer presidential election, and I was working with Eric Winalda on his campaign, and he would often talk about how he would approach the U.S. men's national team right now as a preparation for next summer's Olympics, that he would basically like, hey, this is an opportunity to start the slates clean. We've missed the last couple of Olympics on the men's side. Let's make that a priority. Let's just basically put our entire team, men's national team, the senior team, and think of it as the Olympic team, and just rebuild. Which kind of follows a little bit of what Japan did this summer. And to me, that highlights more what you're talking about in terms of that discipline and the culture. Picking up on culture, I want to ask you to explain for the audience, because I love this statement that you say, and you say it all the time, and I love it, where you talk about culture. Culture eats strategy, eats whatever for breakfast. Give us that statement and unpack that statement for us.
Yeah, well, it's a couple of things. I mean, the reality is, and this was from all of the research I did in studying different countries, different federations, different countries that, well, to be honest, the countries that really are hotbeds for development, right? And I started realizing, trying to search out and see, is there some kind of specialized coaching going on, or is there some kind of secret recipe, that's happening with young kids and coaches? Is it that they have better facilities, all of this? And then I realized that it came back to the same common denominator, and that is that many of the countries that have won World Cup tournaments, and there's only 8 out of 211 member associations in FIFA, at least on the men's side, you realize that those countries' cultures are conducive to developing players. So you realize that, a strategy in the absence of a culture doesn't tend to get us too far. And when you start seeing the amount of money that is being thrown into development, I mean, literally in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of countries trying to, find that silver bullet, and find that, secret sauce on how to develop players. And you see it's the same countries, right, that keep performing, and getting to the final four, to the final of a World Cup tournament. It's the same countries over and over again. So when you see what's acceptable in these countries, so I try to compare it to Japan. So, for example, in Japan here, it's totally culturally acceptable that when your child is 6 years old and they cross over that line into organized play, that they will train probably 3 to 4 times a week, 2 to 3 hours per session, 52 weeks a year. That's a culture thing. Everybody accepts that. Everybody accepts that that's the way that, that they organize the game here, and it's accepted by people and families. And the other thing too is that the culture is such that in Japan here, this is basically the whole amateur. At least let's talk about under 12 because that's usually the biggest numbers. The whole under 12 football development and the whole plan is done by volunteers. So a majority of kids that play are playing for teams that are being coached by volunteers. Some they get paid, but for the most part, it's very cheap, so the barrier is low. So my kids, and they play purely in a Japanese team system. They pay probably on average of maybe $100 to $150 for the year, and that pays for the uniform. That's it. Now, if they go away for a camp or something, maybe it's $200 or $300. But for the most part, it's just maybe a couple of $100. It's not like in the thousands. And then all the facilities that they use are free. Nobody has to pay for a facility here to be used because the community, and again, that's another cultural thing because we don't have such a litigious society and culture here. People aren't afraid that, if little Johnny trips over and breaks his toe, that he's going to sue the school because, he was clumsy and he gets $1 million. So, I mean, it's just these are cultural things, right? And so when it comes down to it, and I see the great countries and the best countries that develop players and develop the best teams, to me, it's absolutely as clear as can be that those cultures play the biggest role in football development for me. So that's why I'm always preaching culture, culture, culture.
So now we have navigated a winding back road back to where we were in the beginning of culture in your book and your work, which to me is really a roadmap to creating a soccer culture in your house. As a mom or a dad, and how do you create a soccer culture for your kids? Maybe you're not from a soccer background. Maybe this is something new for you and for your kids at the same time. Tell us how you landed on this age group, 3 to 6, and what led you in your work and in your research to writing your book in the first place?
Sure, good question. So basically, as most people know, or if they don't, your listeners, I'm my background is as a technical coach, purely as a technical coach. What's a technical coach? Well, I'm looking after basically developing individual players, not out on a team. Now, I have that experience. I've done that. I was the coach of the under 12 national select team in Japan for about 10 years. But my primary responsibility and job has always been a technical coach. So it wasn't until I had my own kids that I started realizing and putting pieces together. And I have a wonderful kind of statement in my presentation from Steve Jobs. It says the only way you can connect the dots is by looking backwards, not forwards. And I started looking at everything that I had learned from previous, not just on the technical side, but I have a very unusual skill set because I work with brands, I work with media, I create content, I've done events. So I have a very good understanding of the football ecosystem. So it wasn't until my kids were born, and again, I'll give you the short version, but I placed a lot of these little mini balls inside my home. And when my first son, Kaito, started walking, I made these balls part of the environment. And I encouraged him to just kind of play with the ball, try to pull it back. But I discouraged him from kicking. And that was really the big game changer for me, was that I realized that this is a sport where the entry level is kicking or shooting usually. And when you go around to most parks in the world, you'll find that they're filled with parents and they're kicking the ball back and forth. So what I'm saying is that before conditioning a kid to get rid of the ball, we have to condition the boy or the girl to basically hold the ball. And during my research again, I'd come across a statement or a story by Neymar's father, where he was saying, the world doesn't understand football development because in Brazil, kids don't fall in love with football. They fall in love with the ball. They fall in love with the ball first, and that leads to falling in love with the football. So a little 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old doesn't have any idea or context of playing the game. They fall in love with the ball first, and that leads to the game. So I understood that. So I set up the environment inside my house and made basically the ball the favorite toy. And every time my boy would address it and play with it, I would try to encourage him not to kick it. I'd kind of model it. I'd pull it back. And then it wasn't until I was asked in China, I was doing some work already for the Chinese government or the professional team or the federation or one of those. And I got asked to meet with a owner of a very well-known kindergarten in Beijing. And if I would talk to him about maybe some ideas. And Daniel, literally, I was on the plane ride from my home to Tokyo, and I had my Mac on my lap, and I pulled out a blank PowerPoint, and I started writing down ideas, and then I started just writing ideas of what I was doing with my son. And sure enough, that's how this whole thing got born. And then I started putting down other notes, and then I started documenting. I started videoing a lot. And again, long story short, I started connecting many, many, many different dots. But it wasn't until I started creating this presentation, and that presentation started to grow. And as of today, I think I've got about 170 slides in that presentation. I go around the world. I show this presentation everywhere. I've been invited to the biggest, professional clubs in the world, including Manchester United, Ajax, Dynamo Zagreb, federations as well. So this thing morphed into this huge presentation. Then I thought, okay, well, why don't I write a book based on this presentation that I'm going around the world doing? So that's how the book came about. And then one very important piece of it, which was a massive breakthrough for me, was that what I had just almost done with the book, and I was contacted by a very prominent, well-known doctor from Harvard Medical School named Dr. John Rady. He's one of the foremost neuropsychiatrists in the world. He's written a dozen books. One's called Spark. It's very well known. And Dr. Rady contacted me because he heard about work I was doing in China, and he was working in China. So he asked to have a chat with me. We had a phone call, and then he took a big interest in my work. And I told him I was writing this book. He said, if you want, I can read the manuscript. I sent it to him. And then he graciously offered, and he wrote a big piece in the book. And we made it into the forward and the afterword of the book. And since that, I've been doing collaboration with him. I'm working on an unbelievable research project right now with a professor from Stanford University and a professor from Harvard University. But what happened with Dr. Rady was he basically explained the science to me of what was happening inside my living room that I could not explain, but I knew it was working because I could see the results and I had video. So basically, kind of here it is. And for me, if there is a secret sauce, this to me is our secret sauce, and it's here. When you've got a child and they're playing inside a home, that's what they consider a very safe, protective environment away from ridicule. That environment of being inside the house. And that connection between the child and the parent, and that understanding for a child's need for parental approval is what's key. Because the child is always trying to get the approval and please mommy and daddy or whoever the primary caretaker is. And what happens is that interaction creates what we call an electrical chemical process in the brain, which is called emotions. So when you can create an emotionally charged environment, okay, that's when deep learning and long-term memory takes place. So then when I started correlating and reading all the stories, I filmed a special down in Australia based on 11 stars that played in the past World Cup in Russia. And these weren't 11 Australian stars, but it was for a broadcaster that had the World Cup rights. And I connected the dots. I started doing my research, and I found the common denominator was all of these players started playing between the ages of 2 and 5, and all of them started playing around the house and the role that the father and the mothers played. And who are those players? Messi, Ronaldo, Suarez, Iniesta, Neymar, Pogba, Hazard, Lewandowski, Cruz, Kane. And then I started connecting all these dots and thinking, wait a minute, these kids are getting such an early start before anybody else. The role that mom and dad are playing, more often than not, is happening inside the house because it's a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old. And hence, again, that validation of this whole concept that football starts at home. So if you see the best of the best, there's almost always a backstory that always circles back to what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I absolutely love it and love your work, love the book. It's why I recommend it so often because I really feel like for the first time ever, we have the ability to say, here, do this, read this, understand, you know, and you've made it so accessible, a roadmap to create true soccer culture in your house. You know, which is, you know, on a micro level, if we had that happen, you know, multiples and exponential times over, creates a soccer culture on a macro level. And so, you know, we can't get there if we don't take care of our own houses first. And I've seen it with my own kids. Your work has inspired, you know, the work with my kids, and you know, my wife may you know, get annoyed by the fact that we have balls everywhere. She's often complaining about that we can't get anywhere without a ball. That it's always banging in the trunk or you know, in the car. Or the other night, she and I were out and we didn't have our kids with us, and there was a ball that was rolling back and forth in the back seat floorboard. And so I reached back and grabbed it because she was, you know, getting annoyed by it. So I pick it up and, you know, kind of tossed it further back into the car to keep it from rolling around. And I take another turn and we hear another ball in the back. And I'm reaching back and I was like, man, I guess there's more. And she's like, I can't get rid of them. They're everywhere. And so like you know, we definitely have been inspired by your work, in your thought process, in trying to create a soccer culture within our own home in terms of having balls everywhere. I mean, we even took and my oldest son still has his room set up in a way where he can do technical work in his room. So he's got everything kind of over to one side. And so if you walk into the room, if you're an interior decorator, you'd be like, man, this is a terrible design. But functionally, he's like, I don't want furniture around the room because I want at least, you know, 60% of my room accessible so I can do touch work. And at one point we even had both boys in the same bedroom so that they could have one room completely cleaned out. It had nothing in it, and all they would do is go in and play. So, you know, that's part of, you know, our way of trying to create soccer culture within our house, but it's been inspired by your work. And to me, that what you're hitting on in terms of players like Messi and Neymar and Suarez and others, and the work with your own son that you've documented is the key. I mean, that's, you know, I said this the other day, and I was actually talking about you, and this is before I was even having a conversation with you about coming on the show. Because again, I talk about your work all the time to people. And one of the conversations I was having with someone about your book was like this. I said, look, if you were to send your kid to school and you had never taught them to speak, so they go into kindergarten and they've never said a word in their life. They, you know, they can't speak the language. They don't understand the language. And you drop them off at kindergarten and go, hey, enjoy yourself, have a great time. It's going to be awful. And I said, that is how drastic it is when you take your son or daughter at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old and you drop them off for their first team practice and they can't speak the language of soccer with their feet. If their feet don't work with a soccer ball and you drop them off, it's going to be a frustrating experience for them. And that's why it's so important to take your kids when they're, you know, just walking all the way up to 6 years old and keep those balls around so that they can just speak the language of soccer. And when I put it in those terms, they were like, wow, that makes sense. So
Well, yeah. Well, here's another analogy, and I get a lot of studies. I'm very fortunate because I'm connected academically and around the world. A lot of people send me things. They did a study and they found that two infant babies, one coming from a professional family, wealthy family, and then the other one coming from a poorer family where the parents aren't around. That the wealthier kid is basically going to be exposed to about 150,000 words per hour, okay, as an infant, which means each year, by the end of the year, it comes out to roughly like some crazy number, like 8 million words, okay. Well, by the time that child is 4 or 5 years old, they're exposed to 32 million words compared to the other child. And then they just track it and they can see. I mean, so it's exactly like that. It's like sending your kid to like an advanced mathematics class of, geometry or algebra or trigonometry when nobody offered the child the class for counting or adding and subtracting. And that's what happens in the sport because, and here's the other reality, and I said this on a stage in Russia on a with the Secretary General of FIFA. I was on a panel discussion. I said the reality is we call this the world's game, and the world's game is failing the majority of the kids that play because a majority of kids who play the sport are technically poor. That's just the reality. Everywhere in the world you go. So there's something that we're doing wrong. It's the approach. But yeah, absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. It's exactly like educate. When you find a child who excels in education, you'll find that there's a culture at home. There's that word culture again. A culture at home that values education. That's why the kid's doing well in school. So everything starts at home. And we're just highlighting that. If you want your kid to be a good soccer player, then you might want to basically prepare them for the day they're going to cross over that line into organized play because there's just so many benefits. The kid shows up on day one. That kid's more popular because kids want to be paired up with him or her or he or she. The coach is singling them out to come out and demonstrate. So now the kid is getting a little confidence. They're getting opportunities to experience leadership at the age of 6 or 7. So I mean, there's no doubt about it. The benefits of the early start.
well, I definitely would love to have you back on again soon to talk even more about your work and get into even other conversations that I would love to have with you about how we create change on a macro level within countries of changing culture on our next chat. But I really appreciate you coming on today. How can people connect with you, and how can they follow your work and connect with you online, social media, etc.?
Sure. First of all, yeah, I'd love to be back again because I can tell you all the exciting things that we're doing around the world, but even in particular in the United States, we've got some massive projects that are happening in the United States, some that have started already, and then some that are going to start that are going to be, I think, game changers for the United States. I'm very active on social media, as you probably know. You can find me on Twitter, Tomson. That's TOMSAN106. Our website too is tomsan.com, TOMSAN.com, COM. We have the second edition of our book, Football Starts at Home or Soccer Starts at Home, depending upon what country you're in. That's going to be coming out, I would say, 100% sometime this month. It's at the printers as we speak. It's been sold out for several months, unfortunately, but it's coming back online very soon. So those are the ways that you can engage with me. I answer and reply to probably 99.9% of all the inquiries, and some of them can be pretty wacky. But I try to, if you deliver your questions or your challenges to me in a polite form, you'll always get a reply.
Well, I'm a testament to that. As we connected years ago, and I really have been a big fan of yours for a long time, and really personally appreciate your work, and really glad that you're now starting to make some inroads here in the U.S. as we all know, we have a lot of work to do to improve our soccer culture within this country. So I'm excited to follow that, and we will definitely look to have you back on again soon to get into some of that work. And again, big thank you to you for spending some time with us today and coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Daniel. Anytime. I enjoy the chat.
Thank you. That was Tom Byer of Football Starts at Home. You can find that on on Amazon. You can again find his website tomsan.com, TOMSAN.com. And his work is, if you have small kids or you're about to have kids, you should get the book. It's an easy, quick read, and it is a great guidance for you as a new soccer mom or soccer dad on being able to build culture within your own house. Not even having to worry about organized soccer down the road. Like, how can you prepare your son or daughter to fall in love with the ball first and then the game later, which I think was a great point that he brought up there as well. Our sponsor this half hour is Charity Water, an organization doing incredible work around the world, much in the same way that Tom does great work around the world. And Charity Water provides clean drinking water to people, and they are changing lives, changing villages, and you can be a part of that story by going to charitywater.org. We will be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Monday, July the 1st. Really big thank you to Tom Byer for spending some time with us today. His work is incredible, and you should definitely check it out. Thanks to him for coming on the show, and I really look forward to having him back on again to talk more about his work as well. We have a big week ahead of us. Sarah Loden, Thomas Sawinski, Brian Costin, and Sherry Levesque coming up later this week. 4th of July week here in the United States. So stay safe this week. Enjoy yourself. I know a lot of people have vacations planned, but thanks again for tuning into the show each and every weekday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch live on danielworkman.com. And we appreciate all the viewers and all of the feedback as well. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see everyone again tomorrow.